I'd like to now call forward to speak to us, Kathleen Donnellon. Kathleen's going to be addressing good governance in a faith-based landscape, followed by an opportunity for question and answer from the floor. I came across this quote from the American Franciscan Richard Rohr, and I thought it spoke in part to what we can look forward to with Kathleen this morning, particularly that opening line. The best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. And I hope that in what we will hear from Kathleen this morning, it can move us towards that. Kathleen is a lawyer, a non-executive director and board chair. She has extensive experience working with various Catholic congregations and organisations in relation to mission and governance. Kathleen's book, Deep Governance Matters, The World of Community Service and Mission, was published in 2023 by Garratt Publishing. Please make Kathleen welcome.
Thanks, Pat. In 2022, early 2022, I was sitting in an orphanage in Venelale in the hills of East Timor. And I was there with another small family group, and we listened to a group of lovely children sing to us. And after they finished singing, they came and intermingled with us, and we spoke to the sisters who were caring for them. And the sisters then took us on a tour of the orphanage, and of course we saw the dormitories with the long bunk beds, and we spoke to them about their needs and about what education support they might need, what medical support. It took me quite some time to realise that what I didn't ask that day was the most basic governance question, and that is, what is the mission of this orphanage? And it might sound really obvious. Well, it's an orphanage. The mission is to look after the orphans, except that that would be inaccurate because more than half of the children were not orphans. They had families and villages, but those families and villages were not capable of looking after them. So early 2002, independence hadn't happened. That was still a little way down, a few months down the track. The Indonesian military had not that long left after the referendum, so the place had been razed. There was virtually no infrastructure. It's not surprising that families couldn't care for their children and villages couldn't at that point in time. But if we had asked that question, what's the mission? And the answer then might have been, well, to look after the orphans and to look after those other children whose families are not able to do that. That might then have led to the next question of, well, okay, is there something we can do to put in train a process to support those families and villages so that over time they will not have to hand over their children to these very caring and very loving and very overworked sisters that were looking after them at that point? What processes would we need to put in place to achieve that kind of sustainable change? And so when I look back at that now, I think, okay, the lesson there is that governance should lead us, good governance, should lead us to ask the right questions. Asking the right questions should lead to the right actions and hopefully then the right outcomes. So, as you've heard, look, I wrote this book about governance a couple of years back. I sometimes think if I went back and talked to my 15-year-old self and said, hey, down the track, your superpower is going to be governance in faith-based, not-for-profits, I think I might have cried. But I have to say, it's actually been a great path. I've worked with lots of congregations, lots of orders, and it has been occasionally frustrating, I will not lie, but genuinely inspirational all the time. So, governance, we can probably all just say, yep, we know what that's about. Integrity, transparency, accountability. We know we need to do that. How do we achieve it? We achieve it by all sorts of governance processes that we hopefully have in place. Things like clear reporting lines, our compliance processes, our risk management plans. All those things hopefully will be in place. When I talk about governance, I like to draw a line between good governance and bureaucracy. I kind of think of bureaucracy as being the grimy underside of governance. Good governance ensures, or should ensure, that we do our work well and that we hold true to mission. Bureaucracy, on the other hand, is box ticking. It's unnecessary meetings, duplicated reporting. You know what bad bureaucracy is. Now, governance and mission. So I'm going to talk a little about how they fit together. I was in a meeting once with a group of trustees, and I was involved in a robust discussion with one of those trustees, at which point she said to me, "Governance doesn't matter." Now, that was like a stake through my heart, because of course governance matters. How do I count the ways? In fact, this woman, of course, knew completely well that governance mattered. She's a very smart woman. What she was actually trying to say in her frustration at the moment was that where there's a conflict, if there's a conflict between governance and mission, mission has to win. And I don't agree with that, but I will come to why. Mission is obviously the start of the story. It is the reason that we're here, all of us. It's the reason that we are here doing what we're doing. It's at the heart of everything we do, and for that reason, mission must be really clearly defined. So it needs to be a part of our strategic planning, a part of our strategic plan, in fact, and rolled out as a part of that plan, embedded throughout the organisation, so that everyone understands very clearly what the mission is, whether it's staff, volunteers, partners, clients. We need to govern mission in exactly the same way that we need to govern compliance and risk management. We need to have processes in place to do that. So, what are our mission governing processes? We have formation, for example, and then, induction, and then ongoing formation. And in those processes, we might look at things like if your organisation's been founded by a congregation or an order, you might have that foundation story. We can all look at Pope Francis's encyclicals, Laudato Si, Laudato Deum, cry of the earth, cry of the poor, because in some way, whatever all of us do and whatever the actual mission of our organisation does, Laudato Si and Laudato Deum impact on that mission, are a part of that mission. Catholic social teaching has already mentioned today, and there's some fantastic stuff in there to do by way of formation. We can have mission-focused employees, we might have mission-focused board members. But I think one of the most important things as boards that we need to do, well, as organisations as a whole, as organisational leaders actually, is to have a mission lens over our decision-making, a mission lens over especially our significant decision-making. And that sounds fairly straightforward because, of course, you know, we're going to make decisions that align with our mission, except that sometimes it's not so straightforward. Sometimes it gets really tricky. I was the chair of a board once where we were completely dependent. It was a development aid board. We were completely dependent on independent donor income, and we sacked our largest donor. That was brave. That came about because this donor we had worked with for a really long time and had done fantastic work with them in country. There was a change of leadership in that organisation, and they became very prescriptive about the way that they wanted us to deal with their money in country. That was simply not the way we operated. Best practice is to work with your partners in country, to work with them on the programs that best work for them. And the money that was coming in now was not being spent on programs that they actually wanted for their own communities. So it took us a long time to sack this donor. They were literally our largest donor, and we, of course, as board members, have fiduciary duties. We have to take very seriously any consideration of that kind of action. But as time went on, it became more and more clear that we were not acting in accordance with our mission of supporting our partners in the way that they needed to be supported in a very collaborative way. And not only that, but within our office, we had people, it was a small staff, and we had people working exclusively for this donor, effectively, within our organisation. Their morale was down in their boots because they knew that the work they were doing wasn't being valued anywhere, really. So eventually, because of that mission lens over our decision-making, we sacked the donor. I'd love to say that a new donor jumped straight in and took over, and that didn't happen. But what did happen was those people who were working in our office were freed up. They suddenly became very energised and motivated about going out and finding new donors, which they did. Fortunately, the shortfall was considerably less than we were a bit concerned it might have been. But more importantly, it meant that every dollar that came in then was being spent the way it should have been spent in accordance with our mission. Another example of a mission-based lens. If, for example, our organisation's in the position to sell a property, cry of the earth, cry of the poor, do we just sell the property to the highest donor? To the highest bidder? Or, do we sell perhaps to the third highest bidder who has fantastic sustainability credentials? Or do we not do that, but do we put something aside to respond to Laudato Si, Laudato Diem? Or not? None of this is prescriptive. A mission lens is not prescriptive. It's just a lens so that it becomes part of the discussion. It's at least part of the discussion. Excuse me. So, I would argue that mission is absolutely the start and the heart of what we do. But from that point on, mission and governance are a bit codependent because it's the governance processes we have that ensure that our mission is delivered in the way it needs to be delivered. And without it, in fact, without those governance processes, mission is at risk of failure. And there are lots of examples of that. I think in the example that I gave you that about the donor, I think we were at some risk of mission failure until we took the final decision. And I have to say that if we're talking about mission failure and governance failure, we need to look no further than our own church. We are all very, very aware of the abuse scandal, which it was just the most catastrophic failure of mission and governance. And of course, we have all now, for a long time, been asking ourselves how that mission was able to fail so incredibly spectacularly. And in getting ready for today, I kind of wondered what would have happened. What would happen if we were able to go back to just pick a date, to 1960, and talk to a priest in a parish at that time and say, what's your mission? We wouldn't say it quite that way because mission probably had a different meaning at the time. We had the missions overseas. But what is your parish? What is your role in your parish all about? What's at the heart of what you do? And I imagine most of them would, how can we know what they would say? But I imagine most of those men would say it's to care for the flock, to provide sacramental support. Would they say to evangelise? Would they say to care for the poor and needy? Some would, some might not. If we went to bishops at the time and said to them, what is your mission in your diocese? What would they say? They would probably say to care for our priests. To care for the priests, very important. To care for the priests, to ensure a strong sacramental program. I suspect, I obviously don't know the answers, I suspect if we went to 20 different bishops, we might get 20 different answers. And in a way, that's the rub. Because if any organisation doesn't know what its mission is, really clearly what its mission is, how can it put strong governance processes in place to support that mission? It would be interesting, I've just noted, it would be interesting to ask bishops today, what do you see as your mission now? And would there be a clearer idea of that now? Certainly, I think Pope Francis, with his synodal process, has been working hard to try and address exactly that. Okay, so I would also like to reflect a little on what it's like being a Catholic organisation in a secular world. Because we all know that there can be a disconnect between Catholic teaching and the lived reality of many or even most of the people in our organisations, or that we deal with through our organisations, staff, volunteers and so forth, when it comes to issues like contraception, abortion, gender, euthanasia. And if we look at something like abortion and euthanasia or something, the responses to that are probably quite different to looking at something like the use of artificial contraception. But the rules against artificial contraception are still there. So it's there are blurring of lines there, and that can make it interesting for us as people working within the space, but also interesting for the people that we're dealing with and who sometimes are wanting answers from us because because we are part of the church working in this space. It was really great, for example, I was involved in school governance at a time when schools were really struggling with how to cope with students who had gender issues. And the Bishops' Conference came out confirming that the students should be managed in a very pastoral way and provided with unisex toilets, that tweaks to uniforms could happen. Having that support from the Bishops' Conference was enormously helpful. I'd also like to consider, because I think this is very real, the impact on on the Catholic Church as a whole, really, but certainly on our organisations, which is my focus today, on negative publicity about the Church. We've talked about the abuse scandal. I also want to briefly talk about two cases, one of which is the Ellis case. We're all familiar with the Ellis defence. That was in 2007, where John Ellis brought a claim against the Church, and the Church used the defence, which came to be known as the Ellis defence, where the court held that the Church could not be sued in regard to the misconduct, as it did not exist as an entity capable of being sued. That became known as the Ellis defence, and of course it had hugely negative publicity for the Church, and still does. The Ellis defence continues to crop up. We had the Royal Commission in 2014, scathing commentary about the actions of the Church. And then late last year, honestly, my heart sank when I saw the paper with the headlines about Bird versus DP, which was the case again where the Church used the defence of vicarious liability, that they couldn't be held responsible for alleged abuse because it could not be held vicariously liable for the actions of the priest. All of these things continue to hit the media of all kinds with great frequency. Now, when we see these things on a personal level, I have certainly all sorts of responses. I feel concern for the victims, concern about values and ethics, but today my focus is going to be on, because of the nature of this conference, my focus is going to be on the impact of fundraising of that bad publicity. Now, I haven't gone into the specifics of those cases really, because I don't know them. I haven't read the transcripts. I wasn't sitting in the court. I have scanned the judgments, but that's all. But when we have ministries that are, and I've worked in a number of them, where they are either partly or wholly dependent on independent donor income, when we have ministries that are dependent wholly or partly on government funding, are politicians impacted by community response? When we have Catholic schools, we encourage families to send their children to us as Catholic schools largely because of our values base and our values based around the Gospels, the Gospel stories and the care of the whole person. And I think often that is why people choose Catholic schools. And it can feel like these headlines fly in the face of those values. So does that negative publicity directly impact upon the work that we are trying to do? And I think the answer to that has to be yes, in ways big and small. If we're looking at those two legal cases, for instance, of Alice and Bird, both of them were wins for the church. Both of them were wins. And I don't know whether anyone here feels like they were wins. The resulting publicity was certainly not a win for our ministries. So my question is this: was thought given to the effect of the negative publicity and on our ministries? Was thought given to that? I'm not focusing on values here. I'm being pragmatic and looking at the financial impact. And I am not actually necessarily saying that what happened shouldn't have happened. Legal strategising is complex and difficult. There are a whole lot of things that need to be taken into account along the way. And I am not looking at the whole picture because I don't know it and I can't know it, and I'm not going to presume to put myself in those rooms. But simply, did they think about it? Was that one of the issues on the table? The effect of that negative publicity on the church as a whole, but on our ministries in particular. For all of us who are in governing roles, reputational risk is one of the things that we need to take, and we do, very seriously. And when you've got circumstances where it's clear that to win the case will be as bad a result reputationally as losing it, that is a big call. Now, I appreciate that there might be people here thinking, well, those two dioceses are completely separate from my ministry, and that no doubt is true. But the question for me is, do our donors, do our potential families and students, do politicians make those decisions when they are considering whether to donate to us, to send their students to us, or to impact government funding levels? Do politicians make those decisions when they're talking to their constituents? All donors make choices, whether they're individuals, corporates, or foundations. And repeated publicity, I think, surely impacts choice. Do we have data on that? I don't have data on that. It would be interesting to see some. As governors, we have a responsibility to consider seriously the consequences of our decision and to ensure that we have, as I've been speaking about earlier, mission-based decisions. Sometimes the consequences of our decisions are foreseeable and sometimes they're not. Some decisions are difficult and some are not. But when we are strategising, at least I hope we take into account all of the relevant information that's available to us, and we do the best we can do from there. And I'd like to think that in our position as leaders of Catholic ministries, attempting to live the gospel message as best we can, that it's a part of any decision-making process by the church leadership when it's clear that those decisions are going to impact upon the broader church and more particularly upon the people doing the work of the church. Okay, moving on. Give me a public platform and I'm going to scream out about one of my hobby horses, change of pace. If any of you have had a look at my book, you will know that one of my catch cries is, good governance is relational. It sounds really straightforward, again, and we all know that good communication solves lots of problems, might even avoid problems. But again, it can be tricky. I was the chair of a board of a ministry that was moved into a MPJP, Ministerial Public Judiciary Person, with another congregation. The other congregation had established the ministry, the MPJP. We were joining it. Both congregations were not dissimilar. Both of them were coming together with great hope about this being an entity that could continue on the terrific work that was being done by all of the ministries that were now coming into it. There was huge goodwill, absolutely everywhere. And we nearly came apart, we nearly fell apart on the basis of collaboration. Now, both sides agreed, absolutely, that there needed to be collaboration. Absolutely. This was really important. We're on the same page. We're all about collaboration. The trouble was, the two congregations meant completely different things by the word collaboration. So what started happening for us was the change happened and we were suddenly drowned in invitations to meetings. We could not possibly attend them all, and we didn't know whether this was a strategy or a tactic. We couldn't understand it. We tried to manage, and then eventually realised that we couldn't keep going. And so we had the discussion about what was going on. And it turned out we had these completely different understandings of that work. For us, collaboration meant that we would be involved in sort of strategic decision, at least have input in strategic decision making. We'd have input into new programs, and that we would retain sort of significant agency. For them, collaboration meant that we would be invited to every meeting that was happening, but that was about all. They were largely made up of advisory boards. We were an incorporated entity. We had a tradition of our members were very bottom-up. They were very collaborative, I would say, and non-prescriptive in the way that they governed us. Whereas the other ministries coming from the other direction were far more prescriptive. Their members had been far more prescriptive in the way that they were governed. It took a long time to work it out, and even once we worked that out, finding a middle ground was not straightforward because those different forms of governance, top-down, bottom-up, don't come together all that easily. It is many years down the track, and things seem to have sorted themselves out at this point, but I think it highlights the importance of really, really good communication as part of good governance. I used to teach mediation and negotiation at the University of Melbourne, and one of the things we used to talk about was the difficulty of people in mediations in particular speaking at cross purposes, exactly that thing, saying the same words but meaning different things by them. And it often happens, of course, when you've got differences in culture or gender, faith, all sorts of reasons. But I think this episode with the MPJP pointed out to us that it doesn't only happen then. It can happen with parties who appear to come from very similar backgrounds. So it's something that we all need to be aware of. And when we talk about being on the same page, I think it's not only being on the same page, but actually being on the same side of the same page. These days, of course, there is a particular danger when we have emails or texts where things can seem, everything's done by that. And people don't pick up the phone anymore. Everything's done online or on device. And things can seem friendlier than they should or more aggressive than they should. Work from home obviously impacts on that as well, but there are really great outcomes for work from home too, especially for women. So at the end of the day, I think the bottom line is that we tend to spend lots of money on compliance and governance, and that we need to, that's important. But I think spending more time on ensuring that our personnel are good communicators is actually our best investment in achieving good governance. And I just want to finish up with a little quote from Bono from his book Surrender, 40 Songs, One Story. It turns out that the fight for justice comes down to boring words that don't look good on a T-shirt. Competence, governance, transparency, accountability, words that bring transformation, the non-shouty words, the quiet words that turn the world the right way up. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Kathleen began by putting to us that at the heart of good governance, it's all about asking the right questions. You now have an opportunity to ask your right questions of Kathleen. Before we do that, maybe 1 minute for a stretch and a buzz with the people around you, then we'll reconvene with questions from the floor. Sitting there for over an hour now.
Yeah, I know, that's right.
I saw one hand straight away, so we have at least one question. Okay. If we could now resume our seats, please. Thank you. We have a roving mic, so if you do have a question, Ron, Tina down the back, first cab off the rank.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Tina Shembry. I'm from Catholic Care Sydney. Part of my remit is covering philanthropic engagement, and I just wanted to make a comment to your point around the tension between the Catholic brand and donors. We have a program called HOPE, which we primarily fundraise for. We don't get government funding for it. I've spoken to a number of people actually in this room about it. It's a wonderful program, keeping families together. We had one of our long-term high net worth donors host a private event for us late last year. Fabulous event. She's a very well-known philanthropist in Sydney. We had her beautiful harbourside place. We had 100 guests. We had Brian Brown talking about Boy Swallows Universe just after the Logies event, so it was a very hot topic. And I caught up with her recently, and we raised 6 figures that night, and that was purely out of the generosity of her opening up her home. And she said to me she was very disappointed with what we made that night, because some of her friends, including one of her billionaire friends, said, I didn't realise this was a Catholic event. And so we have subsequently spent a great amount of time separating out the Hope brand, leaving the Catholic Care Sydney. Even when I get up, and I usually get up and say, I'm Tina from Catholic Care Sydney, I'm so privileged to work there, we're just doing a complete rebrand. Whenever we speak to philanthropists about the Hope program, we don't talk about the Catholic side, which I think is sad in a lot of ways, but it's the reality if we're going to keep that program going.
Thank you, and I hear you. I have been in a similar position. It's actually heartbreaking because, you know, all of us here can say we want to celebrate the best of the church, and in a lot of ways, and in fact the Cardinal really indicated this as well, the work that the people here do is the best of the church. And yeah, I have no answers, but I completely hear and understand. And I absolutely share the frustration.
I think I have the mic. Thank you for that talk, which I found wonderful. My name is Maeve Heaney, and I work in formation, theological formation, a lot of boards and leaders. And my question is about formation. I love that you said governance overseas mission, because it's the truth. But my concern is we talk about it, and yet how do we get boards and leadership and governance to invest in formation? Because if we don't invest actually in an ongoing way, the cultural Catholicism that we have within 2 generations is going to be gone. And with the resistance, if we don't scaffold what it means to be Catholic, with all the complexity that the organisations we carry, for me, that's what keeps me up at night.
I think those mission bases, they need to be actually in the strategic plan, not just part of discussion, but it needs to be part of the mission lens needs to go over the strategic plan. And so when the strategic plan is being rolled out, and that includes resources, then formation is resourced in that way. That's where it comes from. It's there and it's a priority. Yeah. I think, yeah, essential, I think.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Geoffrey Balchi from the Association for Good Government. And the thoughts that came into my mind starting this morning really was the Transfiguration and the response of the apostles to build tents. And Christ practically told them, you missed the point. Because what is the mission of the church? To seek God where he is naked, hungry, homeless, ignorant, naive, open to oppression by the powerful and wealthy. And my question is, have we actually done that? Is our work attracting replication rather than donation? Because somehow it breaks my heart to open ourselves to donors who want to manipulate us to their ends and sacrifice our Christian mission. And I'm hoping that this conference will be an opportunity to explore our hearts, to explore our consciences, to explore our own history, if we have actually performed the mission of Christ. So that's what I'd like to say this morning, and thank you very much for inspiring such thoughts.
Thank you. And can I just, one comment I would make about, I find what you say very moving, and one of the things that I would say about that, I think for all of us in ministry, you know, we talk about we're here doing the work of the Gospels, and I absolutely believe that we are. But we also need to look at the work that we're doing. We also need to have regular check-ins and check-backs to make sure, are we actually reaching the people that we should be reaching today? We might have been reaching those people 3 years ago. Are we still reaching the people that we need to reach today? And I think that ties into your comment. We actually need to start, like schools, for example. That's a classic. When we have, if we're supporting students who wouldn't otherwise be able to, by bursaries and things, who wouldn't otherwise be able to come to the schools, how is that happening? By way of example, is that just a sort of a circular internal referral system, or are we actually? How do we outreach to those students who are in need of us the most? I think that's probably a question for all of us in any of the ministries that we're in.
Down the front right here.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Mine is more of a comment, I guess. I'm Jen Cleary and I'm the CEO of Centre Care Catholic in country, South Australia. So a couple of things. You talked about the challenges of the Alice defence and vicarious liability. And one of the things that we struggle with sometimes at the grassroots in being a Catholic organisation is what I would call something that you might think of as cognitive apartheid, which is really that, you know, where there is a lack of transparency, it makes it very, very hard for those of our staff who are not Catholic and living and working in a Catholic organisation. And so if I had a question, it would be, how do we achieve that level of transparency that makes it easier for those people to be proud of who they are and the organisation that they work in?
I really, really wish I had an answer to that one. I really wish I had an answer. Look, I think just the fact that we need to be talking about it. I thought very hard about whether to speak about these issues today, but I think we need to. I mean, when we talk about it as individuals, you know, when we bump into each other and find out the work that we're doing, these are the things that we talk about one-on-one. And I think we need to be talking about it more broadly than that. And the only thing I would say is that the only little, well, as I mentioned, the Australian Bishops' Conference did step up to an extent in relation to the issue around caring for students with gender dysmorphia in schools. It was not perhaps an overwhelming response, but it was a practical and useful response for schools. And so, you know, there is the opportunity. I think we just have to be talking about it and getting these issues out there and doing what we're doing. If anyone else has any other plans, I'm up for it. I'm up for the discussion.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Susan Connolly. I'm the Josephite sister and the chair of the Australian Catholic Social Justice Council. Loved your talk. Fantastic, really. Lots to think about. And throughout the morning, we have heard Catholic social teaching mentioned quite a number of times. And as you were talking, I agree with what you're saying, and I need to think about these things as well. But just in response, particularly to the last question there, the church is never going to be absolutely right, and we do have to acknowledge the awful things that have happened. But look, since I've been in the council, I'm amazed at how quiet the church has been about this fantastic Catholic social teaching that we have. Now, I like to just briefly now to ask everybody in this room to look up the current social justice statement, Truth and Peace, a gospel word in a violent world, and to know that since 1940, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference has issued an annual social justice statement. Now, they're not perfect, but it's a wonderful contribution, and I just think that it's the best kept secret in the church, really, and it does impinge on what you've been saying, and I'm not trying to say, oh, you know, it's all very good. We know that there are terrible problems, but sometimes I think we can, you know, lash ourselves with bike chains too much, and let's have a look at the good things that are done too. And look, I push this one. Please, let's read and give it to your family for Christmas or do something with it. It's there on the internet. Truth and Peace, a gospel word in a violent world. Okay.
We'll make Agnes our final question.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I certainly enjoyed all the questions. I will go back to Jan's question, because everyone in this room, we are blessed with an extraordinary workforce. On average, maybe 15% of our workforce may be Catholic, and on average, a percentage of them are practicing. So we need to face into that reality. So how do we engage our entire workforce? And I go back to His Eminence's presentation, and I suppose walking in the footsteps of Jesus is very accessible if we all remember who Jesus was. And I'll go back to Peter's opening prayer. You know, we are there with the homeless. We are there with the prisoners. We are there with our First Nations people. We are truly walking in the... So if I don't wish to disregard the last 2,000 years. And also, thank you, Sharon, you referred to Pope Francis and his encyclicals. And I think we have access to so many ways that have... So back to walking the footsteps of Jesus, which Peter opened so well for us. And then thinking of some of the encyclicals from Pope Francis, they're so accessible to us now. You know, they're probably the most accessible, maybe because I'm not the brightest person in the room, but certainly accessible to me. And I find them easy to translate to our staff of all faith and no faith. So I think we've got some great assets, for want of a better word, that help us really engage everyone in our mission, because it is walking the footsteps of Jesus. And so I don't know, Jan, that's how I do it. I always remember he was a 33-year-old carpenter and all the great things he did. And that's what we're doing every day, you know, and so that's just an insight. Thank you.
Thanks. Kathleen, thank you for your wisdom, sharing out your experience and insights with us, for the generous way in which we've opened up in questions and your responses, and plenty more for us across the next 2 days to connect one with each other in that sense.